Okay, Tom Frey, former member of 999. I don't know why former. One of these days he's going to rejoin. He's the founder and executive director of the Da Vinci Institute, who deals with future issues, which are beyond me in some way. But let's see, if you follow him on LinkedIn, right, he posts daily nuggets of wisdom about the future, right?
Right.
Okay.
Facebook, LinkedIn, Google Plus.
Google Plus or LinkedIn, you can hook up with Tom Frey. Anyway, please welcome Tom Frey, futurist.
All right.
Future talking.
All right. Thank you all for having me here today. We're a very backward-looking society. We're backward-looking in that we've all personally experienced the past. When we look around us, we see evidence of the past all around us. All information that we come into contact with is essentially history. So the past is very knowable, and yet we're going to be spending the rest of our lives in the future. So it's almost as if we're walking backwards into the future. My job as a futurist is to help turn people around, to give them some idea of what the future holds. So we're going to do some of that today and stretch your thinking a little bit here. So what do we know about the future? We know that the future is constantly unfolding. It's relentless. It's going to happen whether you want it to or not. It's one of nature's greatest forces. I always think about the future pulling us towards it rather than time pushing us towards it. The future is going to happen whether or not you agree to participate. You should try it sometime. Say, I'm not going to go into the future. Good luck with that. The future is in control. If your next project is not aligned with the problems, needs, and desires of the future is going to kill it. Notice I said the problems, needs, and desires of the future, not of the present, not of the past. And so how do we align ourselves with the future? The question I always say we should be asking is, so what does the future want? I always give the future these human characteristics. I told my wife that the future wanted me to buy a new car. She wasn't buying that. So as a futurist, I get asked a lot of times if I have a crystal ball. And yes, I do have a crystal ball. And it was sitting around the house. It was collecting dust, and my wife says, well, why don't you just take this to the office? It's just in the way here. So I took my crystal ball and I put it in the car, and I was driving to the office, and it was no more than about 3 or 4 minutes down the road. I looked over and I saw that my crystal ball had started a fire on the seat next to me. This giant lens, sun shining in. This is like Boy Scouts 101. I should have known better. Luckily, I was able to put out the fire so it didn't cause any serious damage. But I had this revelation. My crystal ball finally gave me a revelation. That the next day, the newspaper headlines were going to say, futurist killed by his own crystal ball. and he didn't see it coming. It's kind of the ultimate insult for a futurist. So that's my one disclaimer I have here. I don't see everything. Let's start off with this interesting question. Who in your mind is the most famous person of all times in the non-religious sense? So who in your mind is the most famous person of all times? And just shout out a name.
Einstein.
Michelangelo.
Michelangelo, Einstein, Da Vinci.
Yes.
Okay. All right, a lot of good ideas here. I happen to be a big fan of Da Vinci, so naturally I post him up there first. Christopher Columbus, Isaac Newton, Einstein, Thomas Edison, Gandhi, maybe Oprah. Actually, I think the most famous of all is probably Darth Vader. But my thinking is that the most famous person of all times has not been born yet, or we don't know who that person is. Now, this should be a real inspiring thought because there's an opening. There's an opening. You could aspire to become the most famous person of all time. The next question you should ask is, what is the accomplishment that made that person the most famous? To say it another way, what are the big things that still need to be accomplished in the world? Now that becomes a head scratcher. So what are these big things that still need to be accomplished? I'm going to take you through a scenario here, and we're going to talk about some big things. But this, I think, is a rather interesting one. In 2018, that's just 5 years in the future, the Norwegian Nobel Committee decides that they want to change the process for how they select the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, they've gotten beat over the head several times in the past with people that the world didn't think deserved it. And so they wanted to change the process. And so what they want to do is they want to hold a global election and get the people of the world involved in this. Now, they have a mandate for promoting peace around the world. And so they want to use this process to get people involved in what's going on. So the voting process involves, they select a panel of 4 nominees. So they select the 4 people that you can pick from. And they announce these people 60 days before the election. It's a 24-hour election process, so all the votes come in within 24 hours. And the votes can be cast via computer, tablet, mobile phone. This is a new election software that's bug-proof and foolproof, and hopefully we'll have it by then. Now, they have this peace mandate, so they think that this is going to help them, but they want people to do more than just select a name from the list. They want them to know something about each of these candidates. So they pre-test each of the candidates. They ask 2 rudimentary questions about each of the candidates, not designed to trip people up. And you get 4 attempts to get all the questions right. So it's not intended to disqualify people or anything like that. It's just intended to force people to know a little bit more about each of the candidates. So in the end, the winner is announced. 740 million votes are cast from people in 50 different countries, and the winner suddenly becomes the most famous person in the world through this particular process. Now, when you start thinking about this global election concept, there's lots of possible uses for it. So other applications could be selecting the Time Magazine Person of the Year, selecting the next location of the Olympics, or the next World Cup. But there's lots of ways this can go off the rails. It can go totally wrong. If you somebody decided they want to select a new world leader, it probably won't go over so well. Or if somebody wants to decide who owns the moon, that might not go over so well either. But there's lots of issues around the world, like voting on who owns a particular island or some policy. Suddenly we want to ban plastic bottles all over the world. Something like that could possibly be something that would go through this, and that may or may not work. But at what point does the number of votes constitute a new global mandate? At what point do the leaders of the world have to start paying attention to this? That's what I think becomes a real interesting question. So as we think through technology like this, is how far-reaching could it be? At what point do countries, people, and businesses push back? It'd be very controversial. But the key question in my mind is, will it create new industries? That, in my mind, is the key question here. And I have to say, yes, I think it will. Now, this is what I call a catalytic innovation. Catalytic innovation is different than disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation disrupts existing industries. Catalytic innovations create entire new industries. So in the past, catalytic innovations were like the electricity, automobiles, airplanes, telephone, photographs. All of those created entirely new industries. And here's the key thing. All industries have a beginning, a middle, and an end. All industries will end eventually. There's a life cycle. This is the bell curve. And the interesting thing about most industries today is that they're in the second half of the bell curve. What's key about that is the fact that most of them have a declining employment base right now. They have to do more with less, and they're hiring less people. So if we take the example, we'll take the example of peak steel. We could talk about peak oil, but that gets too controversial, so we'll talk about peak steel. The projections are that the peak demand for steel in the world will be reached somewhere around 2024. And so that's the time when the peak demand for steel gets reached. We come up with composite materials that replace steel, and so the steel starts to decline. Now, the peak demand for employment in the steel industry actually happened in the 1980s. That's when most of the highest employment in that industry was during the 1980s and started declining after that. So in all these mature industries, there's this double bell curve with the employment and then the demand for this product or service. So as my favorite physicist, Max Planck, likes to say, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. All right, let's go with 50 years in the future, 2063. You're standing in front of a vending machine. What kind of payment are you going to put into it? Just yell out an idea.
You're not.
Fingerprint? You're not going to put anything in?
Facial recognition.
Facial recognition? Yeah, it could just be voice commands too.
Coded implant.
An implant, okay. Yeah. The vending machine technology is changing real rapidly. I don't know if you've been paying attention to that, but a lot of interesting stuff's going on there. 50 years from now, vending machines could be mobile, perhaps even flying. They may come to you and know what you want. It could be this short little guy trying to give you beer all the time. Over in Japan, they're exploring the idea of convenience stores that are totally done out of vending machines, dispensing eggs and milk and meat and everything. Vending machines are taking over the restaurant industry. So there's totally self-serve restaurants and bars where you don't even need to interact with a bartender or a waitress. You can serve yourself. Libraries they're being played around with where they dispense books, CDs, magazines, all through a machine. You don't even have to go into a library, so to speak. This is a 24-hour movie theater. People can pick the movie they want and go into a theater and watch it. 24-hour clothing stores where you can have clothing dispensed at any time of the day. That's jeans. This happens to be underwear, bikinis, lingerie. And even a car dealership. This is kind of a tongue-in-cheek one, though. But it gets to the idea of how many things can we take the human out of? How many things can we automate in the future and remove the human component totally? This is the first tellerless bank that was actually set up over in Turkey. These are telepresence banking kiosks, so you don't need local talent. You can have one person that serves banks in 24 states simultaneously. Will there always be a need for physical banks? And you could ask the same question about all the other retail stores, all the other businesses that we normally go to. Can we automate these things to a point where we take the physical people out of the equation? Will we want to? What will it be like living in 2030? I mean, that's just 13 years or 17 years away. What will our phones look like? How will we watch television? Is this watching TV experience? Is it still going to be this appliance sitting in the front of the room, or will it be a projected image up there? Will we have digital wallpaper? Will it be three-dimensional holography that comes out of the wall? These are things we don't know yet. The clothing that we wear is going to change rapidly. Healthcare, how is that going to change? What will a typical day at work look like? These are all things we love to play around with at the Da Vinci Institute. So I want to do a quick poll here of people, and just raise your hand with this. And it has to do with how spending will change by 2030. Will the average person, and we're just going to talk about spending less money in the future. I'm going to give you a series of industries here, and tell me, just raise your hand if you think we're going to be spending less money on that industry by 2030. So the first one is housing. How many of you think we'll be spending less money on housing in 2030?
To buy? This is?
Yeah, just the overall cost of housing.
Are we talking relative to inflation or as an absolute number? Well, I mean, that's important. I mean,
as a percentage, as a percentage of your income. As a percentage of your income, we'll be spending less on housing in 2030. So we have a few people on that one. We'll be spending less money on energy in 2030. Okay, we have a few people on that. Will we be spending less money on health care in 2030?
In which country?
Whatever country you're living in. Okay. Will we be spending less money on transportation? Okay. Thank you.
Can I ask just a quick qualifying question here?
Sure.
We're talking about an average,
as a percentage,
middle class person, or are we talking about all of humanity, where there might be a lot more poor people who can't afford anything?
Yeah.
Are you saying an average middle class working person?
Yeah, let's just make it an average middle class working person.
Okay.
In America.
Yeah, I mean, we can go drill down and make it
want to go that far. I just wanted
to. But I'm trying to make a point here. So let me get some hands on education. Will we be spending less on education in 2030? Okay, so we have a lot more hands on that. Oops. Sorry. And then the last one is insurance. We'll be spending less on insurance in 2030. Okay, just a few hands on that. Now, the key point to this is that any industry where people spend less money in the future, that frees up money for emerging new economies, emerging new industries. And so my way of thinking is all of those categories we're going to be spending less money on by 2030 as a percentage of our overall income. I might be wrong, but I think we're going to figure out ways to make life more efficient and to make it more cost effective. So every 60 seconds, people in the United States here, every 60 seconds we have 2 million new Google searches happening online, 204 million emails are sent, 1.87 million new likes on Facebook, 1.4 million Skype calls, 347,000 tweets, 47,000 apps downloaded, and 100 hours of new content is uploaded onto YouTube every 60 seconds. It doesn't seem like hardly enough, does it? Now, there's two researchers that looked at this sea of information that we're swimming in now. Two researchers from the University of California, San Diego, in 2009, they looked at all this information coming in, and they did something rather interesting. They converted it all into the equivalent of words. And so they were asking this simple question of the average person in the United States, how many words are flowing into their heads on an average day? And this worked out to 100,500 words a day for the average person in the United States. Now, we are consuming information 11.8 hours a day, and this number is going up 2.6% every year. So the logical question is where are all these words coming from? Now, keep in mind this is the equivalent of words. So it worked out so 41% is coming from television, 27% from computers, 11% from radio, 9% from print media, and incidentally that's down from 26% back in 1960, and then lesser amounts from movies and games and things like that. So I looked at this whole concept of all these words that we have coming into our heads, and I applied a little math to it. And admittedly, this is rather rough math, but if you're a high-end information junkie and you are subscribing to a lot of things, you're spending $10 a day subscribing to things, cable television, subscribing to magazines and newspapers and things, that probably puts you in the top 1% of all information consumers. That works out to $99.50 per million words. What a deal. That's a real bargain. So I applied that then to an Ivy League college, and I asked that same question, is how much are their words worth? And it turns out $15,600 per million words. Quite a staggering difference there. Now the question I like to ask people is, how much are your words worth? We all make a lot of money communicating. I mean, if we're not good at communicating, we're not good at a lot of things. And so, how much are your words worth? It's a rhetorical question. I'm not expecting an answer. So, so when it comes to powerful words that have a lot of value, there are certain people out there that have way more influence than others do. So I'm going to talk about four of these people. Mark Andreessen, he's the inventor of the browser, founder of Netscape. He runs this pedigree VC firm called Andreessen Horowitz. His comment is that software is eating the world. The second one is Vinod Khosla. He happens to be the most successful venture capitalist of all times. He was a co-founder of Sun Microsystems, but his comment is that big data is going to replace the need for 80% of all doctors. The third quote we'll touch on is Clayton Christensen. He says by 2019, half of all K through 12 classes are going to be taught online. He's the author of The Innovator's Dilemma. He's a Harvard professor, has quite a substantial following. And the fourth person I'll talk about is Chris Anderson, former managing editor of Wired magazine. He says that 3D printing is going to be bigger than the internet. He believes that so strongly he actually quit Wired magazine to go into the 3D printing business. Now, in a lot of the presentations I do, I talk about this idea that by 2030, over 2 billion jobs are going to go away. We spent a lot of time putting together this projection. Now, this doesn't mean that by 2030 we're going to have 2 billion people that are unemployed. It just means that the change rate for jobs is going to happen quicker than ever before in history. So this is creating this need for us to actually create new jobs faster than ever in the past. So the logical question is where are all of our next generation jobs going to come from? And we're going to talk about several industries that are emerging that are going to create lots of new jobs. But let's start with Mark Andreessen's comment that software is eating the world. So what he's really talking about is that we're actually creating this digital layer that permeates everything physical. And so we have this information layer coming off the Earth. The Earth is radiating information, and we're learning how to tap into it. And a lot of that's happening through the Internet of Things. How many of you are familiar with the concept of the Internet of Things? Just raise your hand. Okay, about half. Now, Cisco says that the Internet of Things started somewhere between 2008 and 2009. That's when the number of devices connected to the Internet exceeded the population of Earth. So there's about 6.8 billion devices connected to the Internet at that time. Now, the projection is that by 2020, over 50 billion things are going to be connected to the Internet. And so the logical question is what are all of these things that we're connecting to the Internet? A lot of it has to do with the app world that we're creating, and so our smart devices are connecting to other smart devices. But this whole app world started in March of 2008. That's when Steve Jobs announced the Software Developers Kit for the Apple iPhone. Now, it wasn't until June of that year, of 2008, when they opened the Apple App Store, and they had 552 apps available to download. Over the next 3 days, those 552 apps got downloaded 60 million times, and the whole world started taking notice of this whole app thing. So as of this morning, there's a total of 879,108 apps that you can download for Apple. And there's, on Android, there's a little over 1 million apps. We don't have the exact number, but they're talking about exceeding 1 million apps right now. So we have right around 1.9 million downloadable apps just for our smartphones. Now, what this is doing is this is actually parsing innovation into far smaller pieces. We have the processing power of the smartphone. We have the apps. These are all created by separate companies. And then the physical products, which end up being peripheral to the device itself. So we can have, in the past, companies would actually have to create the whole ecology of how this all worked. But right now, all of these are separate pieces, and so we are actually, innovations being parsed into much smaller pieces, which is making it easier and faster for innovation to happen. As we look at this convergence, we're seeing, the rise of smart homes and smart cars and smart clothing, smart furniture, smart shoes, and yes, as soon as we have an interface device on our shoes, we're going to start creating apps for those shoes. Actually, I can't wait. I'm trying to still find comfortable shoes. When it comes to smart home technology, you might have heard a little bit of talk about smart home technology. This is all kind of getting consolidated as we speak here, this whole industry. And so there's interface devices that are working with all of this whole universe of new smart devices that are coming out of the woodwork. So I'll take you through a little bit of a scenario here and how this works. So each of these smart devices that we put in our homes gives us our ability to live our life the way we want to live it. And so we create kind of these stories, these life stories. And depending on which door you want to go through, you can decide what story you want to create for yourself. So as you're leaving work one day, you're leaving work and you start traveling home. As soon as you get within a certain distance of your home knows where you're at. It knows how far away you are, because these houses are smart. And so when you reach 10 miles away, it automatically turns the air conditioner on, or it turns on the heater, depending on what time of year. And so it's comfortable in the house by the time you get home. As soon as you pull into your cul-de-sac or your neighborhood, it'll open the garage door because it knows you're coming. When you walk into the house, it knows what mood you're in, so it knows what kind of lighting you want. You can either have that kind of lighting or you can have that kind of lighting. Your house should be that smart, shouldn't it? It fires up your chair to make it nice and comfortable for you. Somebody rings the doorbell, you can find out who's at the door before you open it for anybody. You have smart pet doors that will allow your pet to come and go, but it'll keep out the skunks and the raccoons and other neighbor dogs you don't want in there. You can have biometric door locks in your house so that you can code in permissions for your kids to come into the house or your neighbors if you want, but keep everybody else out. We even have self-filling water bottles now. Some new technology to be able to suck moisture out of the air, and so we can have water containers that fill themselves. We have biometric coffee makers. You put your hand on there, it knows who you are, and knows how much caffeine you should have in the morning, knows exactly how much sweetener should go in there, and it restricts you to just that. This is a new kitchen insect breeding appliance. There's a new food supply in the future is going to be insects. And so this raises fly larvae that naturally you're going to want to put into all your food. Sounds yummy, doesn't it? When you sit down for breakfast in the morning, you can have your scheduling wall clock tell you everything about the temperatures outside, and it can also tell you what's on the agenda for the day. So it maps out your whole day for you. If you lose things quite often, you can put these little stickers on it so you can find them wherever these things are that you typically lose. You can watch babies, and some of these baby monitors are very smart. They can monitor whether the child's breathing or not, and check the temperature remotely and things like that. And if you got plants growing in your house, you can talk to your plants. Your plants can talk back. You can set up things so it can tweet you when it needs water. That'd be very handy. And just when you start going to take a shower, you're not going to get away from the internet, even in the shower, because all the walls will be lit up so that you can talk to your friends even in the shower. So is that a good idea? Some of these things you'll like, some of them you'll say, no, I don't want that. But some of these housing trends in the future, we're going to have more stepless houses, better home offices. We have a lot of inventory, but we have a lot of the wrong inventory. Declining need for garages as we start going driverless. We go off-grid in that we're self-generating power systems for our houses, self-extracting water systems for our houses, and self-composting sewer systems so we can go totally off-grid. This becomes what we call self-aware home care. Now, Timex was looking at some of the trends, and they said, well, people don't wear watches as much anymore. So they actually came up with fingernail displays, so you can tell the time on your fingernails. So I looked at that and I thought, if I could literally have information at the tips of my fingers, what is it I'd want to see there? Probably not the time. But we're in this age of constant communication that we're in touch with people all over the world on an ongoing basis. If somebody releases a new report in Moscow, in Tokyo, Beijing, we can know about it within 10 minutes. So we're constantly aware of everything that's going on. We've got to the point where we're totally addicted to our devices. In fact, a recent study said that 1 in 3 people would rather give up sex than their phone. And so if you look at the people sitting next to you, if it's not them. But this is this hyper-awareness that we're creating. So we're aware of things happening all over the world on an ongoing basis. 20 years ago, we did not have anything close to this. The Google Glass product is a fascinating one because it's changing the way we interface with this little device that we always look down at. Now it's right there in our eyes. And so, excuse me, in a meeting like this, you could be surfing the web and not be quite so obvious anymore. But Google Glass is going to give rise to lots of new apps. We're going to have gaming apps that you can play through the Google Glass. And incidentally, Google Glass is the equivalent of a 25-inch screen as seen from 8 inches away. That's how big that display is. It's still early, and it's still clunky and doesn't work the way it should. It needs a lot of work on the interface, but it's all going to come around quickly. We'll have coaching apps, photo apps, video apps, facial recognition apps. You're walking down the street, you see somebody, you know that person, but you can't come up with a name. Instantly it flashes who that person is, who their wife and kids are, and you're suddenly like the smartest person in the world again. I need one of those.
Yes.
But it doesn't stop there. We get into this whole age of smart contacts. And there's a lot of work being done on this idea of smart contacts. And yes, I know if you're looking across the table at your boyfriend or girlfriend and you see these in their eyes, it's a little different experience. But this is very, very intense technology. Lots of information coming and going from these little things that you put over your eyes. And so I'll give you an example of how this works. You have a plate of food like on the top left corner up there, and it gives you visual overlays of the nutritional value of the food, what the temperature is, how much you're going to weigh after eating it. And then down in the bottom right corner here is a coupon, which is fundamentally wrong. There should not be coupons in your eye. Just think that's wrong. But when we talk about all of the things connected to the internet, a lot of it's going to fall into this category of smart dust. And smart dust is essentially a sensor tied to a transmitter that sends out information. And a lot of these are powered by radio frequency signals, so you don't even need a power source for these things. Smart dust started out small, and it's gotten smaller, and it's gotten to the point where it looks a lot like dust. Now, these sensor devices then can be embedded in coatings. It can be embedded in paint that you apply to the side of your car, to the side of your house, to the side of a bridge. And you can be getting information off of these surfaces on an ongoing basis. So when it comes to understanding what's happening to our infrastructure, if we had smart dust painted onto the sides of bridges, we would know instantly when that bridge is going to fail. So when we talk about what Vinod Khosla says is big data will replace the need for 80% of all doctors. Let's put that in perspective. It was as recently as in the early 1970s when flying in a commercial aircraft, they still had 5 people in the cockpit. We had navigators, radio operators, flight engineers, pilots, and co-pilots. Now, since that time, we've automated 3 of these positions out of existence. And the FAA has taken a serious look at eliminating the co-pilot. So that would eliminate 80% of all the people in a cockpit. So if we're going to eliminate the need for 80% of all doctors, it's not like it's going to happen instantly. But it will happen because of devices like this. This is a little bandage that you can put on your body that gives tons of information about what's happening both on the surface of your skin and inside your body. So this is points out the sophistication of this type of technology, and it's very flexible. It moves in and out. And now they're actually creating ways of printing it on your skin. And so, much like a tattoo, it can be printed right on the surface of your skin. And some of the new tattoo technology that they're coming out with, it has a turn-on, turn-off feature. So you can turn it off so you don't, if you're at a social gathering, you don't want anybody to see it, you can just turn it off. We're real close to this smartphone physical. You can You can just have your smartphone do the entire physical for you. You don't have to go to that doctor's office. So everything in healthcare is moving towards this concept of self-diagnostic, self-monitoring, self-treatment, self-aware healthcare. So we're much more aware of what's going on with our body, what things are failing, what things are working well, that sort of thing. And it's also being enhanced with all this body wear. In addition to Google Glasses, which is a form of body wear, we're going to have clothing that has lots of monitors and lots of equipment built into it. And it's going to come in lots of different shapes and forms. There'll be a lot of experimenting going on with this. This one here happens to look like a smartphone that's just attached like a leech to the back of your hand. I don't think this has a prayer. All right, we're going to shift gears here to education. And I think education is going to open up lots of interesting opportunities here, but not for the traditional colleges. I was giving a talk last year in Istanbul, and I was talking about the concept of teacherless education. After my talk, I was approached by one of the executives from Google who happens to be responsible for the continent of Africa. And he made the comment, he says that at Google we're very interested in teacherless education because we want to educate Africa and teachers don't want to go to Africa. And that was a very revealing moment to me because no, teachers don't want to go to Africa. It's a lot of mosquitoes over there. It's hot. It's miserable. There's no Starbucks on the corner. Why would I want to go to Africa? So we are short 18 million teachers globally. And I think this is a low estimate. But 23% of all kids growing up in the world don't ever attend school. So this talks about the shortage that we have of teachers. And as we progress in life, we're going to have to reboot our skills more often than ever before in history. And if we continue to have to insert a teacher between us and everything we need to know, that's a huge impediment. That slows us down. We can't possibly keep up with everything we need to learn if we must insist on having a teacher teach it to us. So when Clayton Christensen talks about by 2019, half of all K through 12 students are going to be taking online education, what he's actually talking about is that half of the classes in K through 12 schools are going to be set up so that kids can take the class that they're interested in and progress at their own pace, and they get badges and they get certificates and things as they progress through this. And whenever they run into problems, they raise their hand and somebody comes over and helps them, but that person is a coach, it's not a teacher. And so the other half of the classes will be traditional interactive classes that are taught in a more social way. So this is what he's referring to as this hybrid kind of in-between situation that's a little different than what we have right now. So whether or not you agree with him, and whether or not it will happen at that pace, things are tending to move in this direction. As Mark Twain says, a man who carries a cat by the tail learns something he can learn in no other way. Isn't that the truth? So Chris Anderson, the former managing editor of Wired magazine, he made the comment, he said that when the tools of production are available to everybody, everybody becomes a producer. Now, he made that statement in his book called The Long Tail. And he didn't realize he was talking about the 3D printing world at that time. But that's what was coming about. Now, when Michelangelo carved the statue of David, he spent 4 years carving this out of marble. And it's a huge amount of work creating the statue of David. We have the potential now with 3D printing technology to print something very comparable to this in less than a day or less than 2 days. So going from 4 years to a day, that's a huge breakthrough. 3D printing technology was created in the mid-1980s by Charles Hull. This is a picture of Charles Hull. Not that old. It's progressing very rapidly, and it's going off in 1,000 different directions. And I'm going to talk about some of the directions it's headed. So we're able now to print in plastics and ceramics and concrete and metals, food, biological structures, liquids, and who knows what else. This is a picture of a 3D printed bicycle. Now they printed the entire thing, including the bearings inside the wheels. And they had to reprint it several times because they couldn't get the tolerances on the bearings quite right. In the end, they had a bicycle. It's not a very good bicycle, but it works. It's the first one. So they go down in the history books as having printed the first bicycle. This guy is actually printing an entire car. And so he actually wants to go into production with his car. My thinking is it won't be a very good car, but it'll be the very first production 3D printed car. In the future, when you go clothing shopping, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go in and get your body scanned. So once you have your body scanned, then you can pick out whatever clothes and fashion you want. And you can have it printed right there on the spot. And the 3D printer right next to you. This is some clothing that's been printed on 3D printers. The material that they're making with this tends to be fairly coarse and abrasive right now, but that's all going to change rather quickly. But it's not just the clothing. We're also going to be able to print our shoes. And so once you can scan in your feet, you can get shoes that fit your feet perfectly. Maybe. We'll see. These shoes still don't look comfortable to me. But this is some examples of the clothing that they're printing, some other shoes that they're printing. And they're printing jewelry. And then we're getting into printing with concrete. MIT was playing around with this. There's a gentleman at the University of California in San Diego has been working on this, what he calls contour crafting. Now, this is starting off printing with ceramics here, and he's going to switch to concrete in just a little bit here. But you can see this layering, one layer upon another layer upon another layer, and it's very revealing how this can work. And in just a little bit, they're going to talk about, they're going to show you a demonstration of them printing a wall out of concrete. Now, here's and this is fast drying concrete, and as it goes around, puts one layer upon another layer, they're able to create a pretty thick and stable wall. And they've been working on this for several years now, so this is not just something instantaneous, but the idea is that they want to start printing houses. They want to print entire buildings. This professor was actually from Iran, and he wanted to, Iran at the time had a big earthquake over there that destroyed lots of houses, and he wanted to figure out, well, is there a way we could actually print new houses quickly over there? So this has been kind of a life journey for him, and you can see how this, if you think of a concrete bumper, this is an entire wall here that they printed, and so this they're doing a curved wall. I won't continue much longer on that, but these 3D printers are getting much bigger. This one is about 40 by 40 feet, able to print pretty large structures. But once we're able to print buildings and print houses, we no longer have the need for flat walls. Every surface becomes an artistic surface. We can print it however we want. Architects are going to have a heyday with this because they can create buildings that are free-flowing and free-form, spires that go up into the sky. They can create things that are totally impossible to construct with today's construction methods. And incidentally, we'll be able to print with glass or metal or concrete for a while and print with more glass and more metal. And we're going to have structures that are totally unrecognizable by today's standards. And if you think about your house in the future, you get tired of it, you can suddenly just grind it up and have it reprinted. Not only do you reprint your house, you can reprint the bathtub and the cabinets and the whole thing. This is the first 3D printed building slated to be printed next year. It's kind of this Mobius strip design, and so this is the one that's slated to be printed first, and it's going to go down in the history books as the first 3D printed building, unless somebody beats them to it, which is entirely possible. This is 3D printed skin for burn victims. This guy's working on printing a human vein for an operation. And this is Lee Cronin, who believes that we should start printing all pharmaceutical drugs. So rather than going to a pharmacy, you can just go up to this machine and it'll print out whatever narcotics or drugs that you have a prescription for. On one hand, it could open up this world to third world countries that don't have access to it, but I'm sure the big pharmaceutical companies are going to have some issues with this. So. And this is Craig Ventnor. Craig Ventnor thinks that we're going to be able to print antibodies and life forms. And there's a lot of work going on in the idea of printing artificial hearts, artificial kidneys, and things like that. So lots of science fiction type stuff is coming to light very quickly. And then we get into food printers. If you didn't think I was getting weird enough yet, food printers. Yeah, think about sometime in the future, you have to ask your spouse to go out to the store to get a kiwi cartridge and an eggplant cartridge because you're going to print dinner tonight. Is that a little weird? Is this a plate of food that you would eat? Looks kind of yummy, doesn't it? It looks better than the insects. I have to admit that. So if you think about all of the apples that come from an apple tree, most of those apples go to waste because they fall on the ground, they're bruised, they're cut. Most of them end up going to waste. If you could take that same apple stock and you could reprint it into a perfect apple every time. Here's my perfect apple. And it's not only a perfect apple, you can also eat the stem and the core and the leaf because it's all printed from the same material. Only you happen to like almond flavoring, so we can make an almond-flavored apple. You happen to need extra vitamin D. We can add that to your apple. And then you're in a crazy mood today, so you want a blue apple. So we can do that. This is the potential for the 3D printed food. So would you buy something in the future if it said it was naturally grown, completely organic, printed food? So in the future, people are going to first print the can, and then they'll print the soup that goes in it. Or they'll print the bottle, and then they'll print the wine that goes in it. That's the type of world we're moving into. You don't think so?
No, I think a whole lot of unmotivated say we're going to do this because it is the future. It's the future because it's what we're doing. Getting ready to do. You haven't suggested any rationale why printing is going to overtake all these other. I don't begin to understand.
Why would you have things printed? They're printing tons of things just like this right now because it's cheaper and you can do it right here. You have something that breaks in your washing machine, you can have it printed here rather than sent over from China. In the process, you're eliminating all of the tariffs. You're eliminating the import and the export fees. You can have it printed right here on the spot. There is no waste to this. This is the old way of doing things is take a big piece of material and then carve away everything that wasn't that piece. This is additive manufacturing, and so it just You just add to it until it gets to be the piece you want. There's no waste. You can create one-off stuff. And if you're not paying attention to this 3D printing world, it's mushrooming very fast.
Thomas, I think some of the concern may be whether or not they'll be able to print marijuana.
Printing marijuana, maybe. Sir.
Yeah, I'm an automation engineer, familiar with printing, and it will find its own niche based on cost savings, just like you said. So some things are really cost effective to print, and some have yet to be.
Yeah, the things that are one-off things are easy to print. Things that you need 1,000 of, it's easier to create a mold and then to do the standard rejection mold and things like that.
Mold, of course.
And so these economies are going to change over time. So when Chris Anderson says 3D printing is going to be bigger than the internet, he's referring to all of these different industries. And so what does this change? Customization is very easy with this. You can change a part instantly. You just have to change the drawing and it's easy to change. Time to market shrinks. So rather than waiting for something to get a mold made and all that, you can actually print it in this afternoon. And actually UPS is actually putting in 3D printers so that you can order parts and have them delivered to you. You send in the drawings and they'll print it and they'll send it to you. UPS is offering that service right now. Products have superior capabilities. You can print it in composite materials that you couldn't get from the original manufacturer. Open designs, you can change things very easily. And the economics of offshore change quickly. And so a lot of people in the U.S. are looking at this and say, oh, well, we can bring a lot of that manufacturing we have over in China back to the United States. That will, of course, not happen instantly, but that's some of the potential. Yes?
Yeah. And with respect to education, what this is saying really is that this is really going to change the need for what sorts of things we need to educate people to be able to do, and skilled labor goes out the window because this is going to give you something better than skilled labor. You can create it perfectly.
That doesn't mean that we won't have skilled labor because we're still going to need the type of material that we use to create this part. We need somebody that understands that. And as this evolves, we're not only going to be able to print surfaces, we'll be able to print electronics onto the side of that surface.
When I was saying skilled laborers, I mean in the traditional sense, like carpenters, pipe fitters.
Right. Right. It's a new type of skill.
It's a different. It's a more intellectually adept skill as opposed to more of a hands-on skill. Seems to me. Well, maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah.
Do you feel that the skills that are necessary, that this will be necessary rather than the ones that are necessary now, are going to require a higher intellectual component and a higher educational component, or not?
In some areas, like the idea of 3D, running a 3D printer, there's things that go wrong. Being a technician that can fix it, repair it, that keeps it flowing and operating. I don't think that that's too much different than being some other type of machine operator. Now, they'll get better over time, but this is a whole new area. So I don't think we quite understand all of the potential for this yet, because this is going off in so many different directions. Sir?
Alicia, isn't it a good point? And you just used the phrase potential. A lot of this depends on what time frame you're dealing with. If you can look far enough out, it's very conceivable that humans really have no part in the process, that technology will be able to do everything better than any human. And we're seeing, at present time, we're seeing a shift, a transition in our economies in which the less sophisticated jobs are disappearing.
Right.
We're seeing increased unemployment among people because they do not have the level of skill that is still usable. Right. And you can foresee that becoming greater and greater to the point where we'll have robots robotic. I mean, it goes beyond automation. Robots basically have brains, and they have their own processes of sensing and changing, and there would be really no need for humans to do anything except what humans feel like doing.
No, they need us for consumers.
Or you can make the money.
That's but now, the thing is, if technology develops to this really high level, there'll be no need for money. Robots don't have to be paid.
Yeah, I don't share that fatalistic view. But
I'm not saying I share it. It's just a concept that we've been kicking around for over 50 years now.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that are kind of scared of what they see down the pike here.
Luddites for that.
As we create driverless cars, we're going to eliminate lots of driving positions. As we create machines that can do all the manufacturing, and we'll eliminate all those manufacturing positions.
Do away with buggy whips.
So what this does is it frees up lots of human capital.
Yes.
And so what big project should we be working on? Because we have the time and the availability of talent to do other things.
Right. Then you're talking about intellect functioning on a very high level. Talking about conceiving things. But even that, in time, technology may be able to do better than humans.
Eventually. But that gives us a chance to go off and do other things. So one thing I like to use is this example of a person with a toolbox is more valuable than a person without. A person with a computer is more valuable than a person without. So a person with a robot or a machine is more valuable than one without one. And so these things need people somewhere in the system. They can't run completely on their own. And so we need people in the middle of all this. And so I think it improves our capabilities. It doesn't eliminate people altogether. Sir.
John. Thank you. Is there a trick to this? Is it on? There, now it's on. Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. I've been, I guess consequences is a word that I want to bring up here. And not only because of this, but earlier we were discussing big data and the amount of data and the amount of inputs and the amount of machines apparently we're going to be wearing 10 per person. So whatever the Internet of Things. One of the consequences of this that I think is visible right now is reflected. Let's see. Let me do a quick story. A friend of mine who was a doctor began bodybuilding, and I'm no doctor, but I mentioned to him. I said, "You're a small frame. Your muscles are getting really big. Your muscles may get so big that they do damage to your frame that's supporting it. There's a balance that needs to happen in your body." And sure enough, about 3 weeks later, he started cracking ribs because his muscles were so strong they were tearing his own frame apart. When you're talking about big data, there's consequences. We're seeking more and more data. Give us more, and we're seeing the consequences in young people and, quite frankly, congressmen tweeting in the middle of important debates where there's so much data coming in that there's no moment to reflect or digest it. I put these two words here, consequences, indigestion. So the consequences, I'm just wondering as a futurist, and when I'm done, my question is, do you guys consider that there are your visions, which are so beautiful and so positive, and I applaud them all, they have consequences in the balance of how a society needs to function? You were just hitting on the reality of what's happening. We have a growing, exploding population in the world, most of which are unemployable or in the broader sense of societies because of lacking skills. The demands at this level of society.
So let me separate this out a little bit. First of all, I'm not an advocate for this. I'm just the reporter. I'm the person this is the trends I see happening. Now, these are all human systems and human technologies. And they're based on human-based systems. And so we have the opportunity to change all these. We don't have to go down this path. I think it's incumbent upon me to kind of let people know what I see coming. Now, some people, it's kind of interesting because when I do these presentations, people see it kind of as this Rorschach test because some people see it very positively and some people see it very negatively. And so I happen to try to stay on the very positive side of things because I don't think it's going to be this dystopian view of the world like most of the movies are painting right now. So
I didn't mean to sound negative. I just was wondering if, as futurists, you also consider this other growing part of humans.
Yeah.
And is there a role in this future beyond the generalities? How do we? Once it gets out of balance, there's no money. There's no consumers, as he said. There's no consumers there to buy these products. You have a limited group of people, more concentrated elite that are able to have these smart homes where you don't have to even get out of bed to function. And your body goes flabby and good luck.
Right. I mean, if we...
And there's moms outside your house saying, feed us, or give us some work. So that's a future.
So there's lots of visions of how things can go downhill. I don't see it's going to go quite off the rails that far, but I think a lot of things can go wrong in the meantime. And so I think it's better that we're aware of what's coming. And so if we want to change it, we have the ability to do that. So, yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'd like to
put the mic closer to your mouth.
There you go.
Okay. I'd like to point out that I got a catalog at the library last week for a 3D printer for under $400.
Oh, yeah.
So these things are coming, whether we like them or not.
Right.
And we can print our houses. We can also print guns.
Right.
And there are negative consequences. We can print other weapons.
Right.
We print a nuclear weapon. I don't know.
Right.
And at what point who decides what we can print or not?
It's really, with the 3D printing world, it's really hard to place controls on these things. And certainly you could pass a law that says you can't print a gun, but who's monitoring all this printing in every house? That'd be very hard to track. But of course the NSA is watching us. So.
There's been a lot of concern about the average worker, what happens to the assembly line guy, what are people going to be doing for jobs. The process is going to happen is that we are going to have less need for as many people as we have. Most countries are in a negative population growth now, most developed countries.
Right.
Only countries that are in a positive population growth are the undeveloped countries. And as they get more and more access to better health care, food availability, water availability, they will have less and less need for large families to take care of them in their old age, who will have enough to survive to their old age. So they'll have, as a natural consequence of all of this, population is going to go down. We will probably have fewer people worldwide who are healthier, more affluent, able to take care of themselves, and enough that would do the technical things that we need done.
So an interesting question to ask at this point is, do we live on an overpopulated planet or do we live in an underpopulated universe? It's different perspectives to the same equation. Now, to follow up with some of your questions, let me continue on here because I'll touch on a couple other subjects and I'll get on the future of work topic here. So let me touch on the driverless vehicle topic. Google has been spending a tremendous amount of time and energy trying to create driverless vehicles that can drive on their own. This is will create what we call on-demand transportation. So if you think of yourself stepping out in front of your house in the morning and you take your smart device out and you punch in, you want to go to work, you want to go to school, you want to go shopping, a driverless vehicle comes and picks you up and takes you to where you want to go and drops you off. And from there, it picks somebody else up from there and takes them to where they want to go. And so having all of these vehicles floating and you can just summon one at your leisure. That's kind of the image that is being created here with all this. And so car companies, rather than trying to sell people on the driver experience, will try to sell them on the rider experience. And they will stop selling units, they'll stop selling cars because we won't need as many vehicles, and they'll start selling transportation. So they'll start charging so much per mile for driving these vehicles, and then they could actually make more money doing that than trying to sell more vehicles. We don't have room for a lot more cars, and from a utilization of natural resources standpoint, the cars that we have sitting around all the time, 95%, 97% of every day, these vehicles are sitting idle in parking lots and garages. From a utilization of natural resources, this is a terrible waste of material. And so early on, one of the big features, and think of driverless cars as, this is another feature that they're adding to cars. So it'll be, power steering was added, then we had cruise control, and then we had some driverless features. So one of the early ones will be an auto valet service. So you go drive up in front of a crowded restaurant, you get out of your car and tell the car to go park itself. And then, much like the Lone Ranger's horse, when you come back out of the restaurant, you whistle and the car will come back and get you. Those things like that will be kind of positive developments in the move in that direction. But once the real benefits come, once we're able to eliminate the human variables, we eliminate all of the things that can go wrong, because too many people are texting, they have trying to drink coffee and put on lipstick at the same time and curl their hair. Once we're able to eliminate the human variable, people can do whatever they want in these cars. And so there's a lot of positives. We eliminate 31,000 traffic deaths in the United States alone. Eliminate 2.5 million injuries, 5.5 million accidents that happen every year. Things will still go wrong, but these are some of the positives. And it creates added freedom for the people that are too old to drive. The baby boomers are going to start demanding driverless cars because we don't want to lose our freedom. So this is what an intersection will look like once everybody is going driverless. The computer will figure it all out.
Just wait for a hacker.
Yeah, hackers could really mess that up in a big way.
I've been there. That's wrong. Exciting.
So the drone world is also a very controversial topic. Last year I gave talks in both Shanghai and in Moscow. In both places they did not want me to talk about drones because drones have bad reputations in a lot of countries outside of the U.S. But there's a lot of fun stuff. In France, there's a company delivering newspapers with drones. This is a burrito bomber that you order a burrito and it'll shoot the burrito out and it'll come down with a parachute. This is a Domino's one that delivers Domino's pizza. But the thing that's missing on all this is the receiving part. They show somebody out there to grab it. Well, when you order packages and something and have them delivered to your house, you're not going to be there. So there's lots of pieces to this whole thing that haven't been thought through very well. But the drone world is evolving quickly, and the military is spending less money on drones moving into the future. And so the drone manufacturers are looking at what are the other markets. And so things like search and rescue, especially here in Colorado, search and rescue will be a big issue. This is a Channel 5 news drone that goes out there, and any accident that happens, they're going to be there on the spot. And also think of whenever there's an emergency situation, cities, the first response for a city will be to send up drones to get eyes on what it is that's happening. And whether it's a hostage situation, a fire, a car accident, whatever it might be, they'll be setting up drones to look at it. Now, the downside of all this is that the same drones that can deliver pizza to your house can also deliver bombs. They can deliver poison. They can hurt people. And so, how do you regulate that? The FAA is tasked with coming up with a plan for all this by 2015. September 2015 is when they're supposed to announce this. Now, they have a number of issues that they have to work through. And, who gets to load things on drones and who gets to receive them and all that. Right now, you can operate drones as a hobbyist up to 400 feet and within a certain range of yourself. And so there's lots of people playing around with this technology right now. But we have the potential to eliminate forest fires completely. We can have drones with infrared sensors that are flying over forests, and once they spot a fire, they can rather than sending out the forest fighters, we send out an emergency drone with fire extinguisher capabilities to put that fire out. Our senator in Colorado, Senator Bennett, has put in a special bill to set up Colorado as a test site for putting out forest fires with drones. So we can see if that actually works. So getting into your topic of the future of work, the average person that turns 30 years old today has had 11 different jobs. My prediction is that the average person that turns 30 just 10 years from now will have worked between 200 to 300 different projects. We're becoming a much more project-based society. The internet is a very sophisticated communications tool, and it's enabling us to align the needs of a business with the talent of individuals in far more precise ways than ever in the past. And so this is giving rise to the great freelancer movement. Now, this may be good and it may not be good. This is tapping into the Gen Y generation, and some of the statistics on Gen Y is by 2025, Gen Y, 75% of all the global workforce will be people in Gen Y generation, who currently only have 6 out of 10 of them actually have jobs right now, half of which are part-time. Over 63% have bachelor's degrees. They're on track to become the most educated generation in all history. Only 7% have actually worked for a Fortune 500 company. 48% of college grads work in jobs that don't require a degree. 56% won't work at a company that bans social networking. Imagine that. They're on track to become the most educated generation in U.S. history. 35% of those employed are starting a business on the side to supplement their income. And by 2020, they're going to account for 40% of the voting electorate. And so they're going to have huge influence on things. So a lot of what's happening is these people are working in co-working spaces. At the Da Vinci Institute, we actually have our own co-working space there. We teach a lot of classes. We have a lot of events there. And but I'm predicting that co-working spaces will evolve into what I call business colonies. People that work project work, that are working as freelancers, a lot of them will have a hard time lining up one project after another. And so there needs to be a way of automating kind of this job finding situation. So business colonies are facilities. I think co-working facilities evolve into these where you put project managers in there. The projects flow into these project managers, and then they bring in part-time people to work on these different contracts that they have. It'll work a lot like the movie industry does today. When a movie project comes into play, they bring writers and directors, camera guys, lighting guys, makeup people all in for that project. But as soon as it's over, they all disband and they form around another project. It's very organic in nature. Some of these business colonies will align around specific industries, whether it's a biotech colony, a gamer colony, an IT colony. But more and more, I think a lot of big companies are going to experiment with this, where they'll put a project manager in a business colony, and then they'll send projects over the corporate walls into this colony, and people will scurry around, get the project done, and shoot it back to the company, waiting for their next incoming project. So I love this quote of Stevie Wonder: "You gots to work with what you gots to work with." He says it so eloquently. That's what kind of Gen Y is finding right now. Is they're picking up a lot of the scraps from the table, and so they got to figure out how to make it work. I'm going to actually skip through this whole thing about Bitcoin here because this it'll take us a little bit too long to get through all that. But the future is ours to write. We can create the rules about the future. They said that over 2 billion jobs are going to disappear by 2030. A McKinsey report came out last year, and it said that they did a study on the internet, and all the jobs that got automated out of existence through the internet, they found that another 2.6 jobs were created in startup companies somewhere in the country. So it's actually a net positive. So I like to say the fastest way to create new jobs is to automate them out of existence, which is real counterintuitive. We're entering into a period of unprecedented opportunity. Why is this so important? Humanity is going to change more in the next 20 years than in all human history. Risk factors are going to increase exponentially, and our children's children who haven't even been born yet are depending on you. As Steve Jobs says, right now is one of those times when you're influencing the future. But sometimes our best efforts look a lot like this. As Thomas Edison says, opportunity is missed by most people because it's dressed in overalls and looks like work. Isn't that the truth? And so any of you that would like more information about what we're doing, we have a free newsletter that we offer at the Da Vinci Institute. I'll have my card up here, and I have some copies of my book if you're interested. I'm not trying to sell any, but they're $20. So, but I'd like to open it up for more questions. Right here.
Yeah, hello. I was really glad to hear about the problems being solved with teaching and using printing for manufacturing and advanced vehicles. And without being a downer here, one of our other subjects we've covered in this gathering is more basic, more global problems such as global warming, overpopulation, the increasing scarcity of some basic resources. And I know you haven't directly addressed them. Everything you've addressed, I think, will be helpful. But are some of those real basic things going to be an issue that might tend to derail some of these more middle class, richer country things that seem to characterize your presentation?
Possibly. I mean, there's lots of ways things can go wrong, and but in the energy world, one of the leading indicators that we look at as futurists is the sheer volume of experimentation happening in any given industry, and in the energy world, we're seeing just unprecedented amounts of experimentation. Now, what actually breaks through and comes out the other side, we don't know yet, or if anything does. But there is a huge amount of effort going in that direction, and so I think that we're ripe for some overhaul of the energy industry, and actually once we decide that we have to dismantle the national grid, that's like a 20-year project at least for dismantling it. That's going to require lots of jobs, lots of labor to do something like that. So dismantling existing infrastructure, that's a big job creator, actually.
The telephone companies already did that with long-haul copper.
Yeah. Back here.
I was not happy to hear about how 3D printing and driverless cars are very shortly to revolutionize the world, because I don't accept most of the assumptions that seem to be being made. And for not, you say you're not promoting these things, but it seems to me that most of your presentation is charged with highly promotional language, lots of assumptions that don't seem to be justified. Take driverless cars as an example, because there's endless hype about driverless cars. Google is developing them, so they must be a reality. But the problem is that if you're talking about an environment in which, like what we have now, but with autonomous cars being introduced into it, it makes absolutely no sense as far as I can determine. I am not aware of any developments in artificial intelligence technology of any sort that could enable autonomous cars to function in an urban environment. If you imagine a highly controlled, artificial sort of a driving environment, one could talk about driverless cars. But to just glibly talk about them as though they are soon to be on the roads, really, to me,
let me answer your question.
They are on the road.
So, and what about the prospect of serious problems overtaking all this first world? It seems to me a lot of the futurist ideas you're talking about are consumer items for the wealthy. But there's all sorts of indications that we ourselves will not be able to afford any number of these things, much less the rest of the world.
Well, true, very true. The driving force behind all this is economics. People can make money off of it. That's why they're going to go down this path. And when it comes to driverless cars, DARPA had the DARPA Urban Challenge in 2007, where they had a competition for people who could create an autonomous vehicle that could travel through a city with no human intervention. That was in 2007. It was the Carnegie Mellon team that won that competition. And as a result of that, we started seeing autonomous cars. The Audi Autonomous is actually the first one that came out. Mercedes actually has a model that's supposed to come out later this year that has a driverless feature under 25 miles an hour in the city. Nokia has announced an operating system for driverless vehicles that's going to be unveiled later this year. There's a huge amount. Every car company out there has a driverless division. They're working on this right now. That doesn't mean it's going to happen instantly.
Right. I mean, what is the proof that these things can? None of this establishes that the technology is feasible. I'm sorry.
Google has already driven over happening.
Oh, well, I don't believe it is.
Yeah, Google's already logged over 500,000 miles on their cars, their fleet of cars, and they can go 1,200 miles without any human intervention, and their goal is to get up to 1 million miles with no human intervention.
And one thing that's driving this is when we reached the age of getting our driver's license, most of us got it within 1 week of the date we turned old enough.
Yeah.
Today, I heard a statistic within the last month that 20 to 30% of kids today, by the age of 20, have not secured a driver's license because they depend on other people to carry to transport them.
And the cost of driving is so high for them. A lot of them can't afford the insurance. As insurance companies compute the risks and everything, the costs keep going up on that. So there's a lot of pushback on that. So if they can get around in other ways, they'll do that. Question over here.
George. I would like to kind of add it to the list of other issues that I think are questions that arise when I think about futurism. Resources, energy, and so forth, the availability. Obviously, the forever receding horizon for fusion. Whether we're actually going to be impelled toward large-scale fission development again, simply because of the problems with coal and so forth. But that one was more or less already mentioned. But I also think in terms of geopolitical events, we're looking at huge changes in China, in India, that are already well underway. And we have Iran getting a bomb, and that's going to be a huge influence on the flow of oil out of the Middle East, if and when they get it, which they probably will. These are the kinds of things, the issues that I would like to, when I hear about thinking about the future, these are the kinds of things that I think will have more influence on my life and my children's lives than as an engineer, I look at these things as gadgets, basically, what the kinds of things that you've been talking about. So those are the subject matter I would be most interested in hearing about.
Yeah, most of what I focus on is technology-driven change. There's lots of people that are working on the geopolitical change and things going down that path. Now, when I talk about these different scenarios and how these unfold, it's intended to be viewed through the lens of, barring any unforeseen circumstances, this is the direction we're headed. We can always be hit by a giant meteor from space, or we could have some massive plague that cripples 90% of the population or something like that. But based on these particular trends, this is the direction that we're headed. And so, again, you can say that this is terrible. Some people look at it and say, "Oh, I can't wait to get there." But my job is to kind of stimulate thinking in this area. Am I always correct? Absolutely not. But I hope I've stirred up a lot of conversation here, and so that you'll be debating this the rest of the night.
Thank you very much.